What concerns me more, though, and what Halsey, to my knowledge, has not really explained, is does she still kiss her fans?
You know what's in the air, you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air. It's possibility, it's possibility, it's possibility, it's possibility.
All right, so Anthony Fantano has dropped a response to some of the drama that he was embroiled in a couple weeks ago. A lot of you may have missed this. Some of you, I'm sure, saw it. But essentially, it started when he did an interview with Olivia Rodrigo. That went fine. No drama there. But it brought a lot of attention to Anthony Fantano, and I think there were a decent amount of Olivia Rodrigo fans that were annoyed, disappointed, whatever, because in the stan world, Anthony Fantano is like the worst of the worst. He's racist, he's misogynist, he's this and that. Mostly this is just because he has reviewed albums negatively of certain pop stars that people like in the past. There are also, some like clips of him floating around that don't look great, compilations put together of him using certain colorful words. So we'll get to that later because that's a part of this. But really, mostly what it's about is stans who are kind of swarming because they don't like Anthony Fantano in general. And what it morphed into was Halsey stans, who I guess there's been long-standing friction between the fan base of Halsey's music, who is like a pop, emo, kind of alternative type singer. And he reviewed her last album very negatively, and her fan base have taken that personally for the last couple years. So that is essentially what this conversation has turned into, is war between the Halsey stans who say that Anthony Fantano is a misogynist who mocked Halsey's lupus and the fact that she was going through chemotherapy while making this album, and Anthony Fantano who's just saying the album wasn't very good and I was just being honest about that. So here's the first part of this response that he dropped. This was kind of an interesting way of addressing this because, like I said, this was a couple weeks ago now. In my view, it had kind of blown over. I'm not sure if he's still getting shit about it or maybe just felt like he really wanted to get his response about all of this out there. So I'll get to all that, what I think sort of the outcome of it will be. But here's the first part where he addresses his criticisms of this Halsey album.
I'm not just simply coming on here to inflate the importance of a few unhinged Twitter stans, because these are now sentiments that have been echoed by Halsey herself. Who cares he gave a bad review? I care that a pay-for-clicks reaction YouTuber can facade as a pro-critic and say it's main character syndrome for an artist to lament her medical suffering on an album about her own life. He's a raised by 4chan edgelord bully. Yuck. So I'm an edgelord bully raised by 4chan who said it was main character syndrome to lament your sickness. When she sings about needing to kill her ego because may in fact kill her, she was not kidding, because this entire record has the worst case of main character syndrome I've heard on any pop album in 2024. Not only due to the fact, okay, it is true, around the 7-minute mark in the review, I do actually say that phrase, lock 'em up, throw away the key, I'm guilty. And look, it's totally fair for you as a viewer to decide whether or not that's a fair assessment of the album and its writing, or even if that's language that's too harsh for a review generally. But what you can't do is tell me why I'm saying the things I'm saying, especially when I have told you guys why I've said them. So let's go over this list of problems I have with the album. Not only due to the fact that this record subjects listeners to multiple indulgent cuts that sound like messy demos and just would not make it onto a more respectable release that was actually well conceptualized. Okay, so my first issue that I list is multiple indulgent tracks with draft quality production or subpar production that, again, would not make it onto an album that had maybe a bit more effort or focus being put in on the production.
Okay, so there you have it. And I'm not going to talk too much about the album here. I've listened to a little bit of it. I'm not a huge Halsey fan or anything like that. The main criticism that people seem to have is that he didn't take a personal tack when addressing this album, and because of that, he downplayed a lot of the feelings that Halsey had about her life. This whole concept of the Great Impersonator, which is what the album was titled, is actually based on this idea of how lupus works. It's actually called the Great Impersonator because it looks like other diseases, which makes it harder to detect. So that's a great concept. But Fantano's criticism was essentially that it was a mishmash and hodgepodge of different ideas that didn't come together well and weren't well executed. I will say something that Anthony Fantano has done consistently over the years is downplay the emotional legitimacy of certain albums that he doesn't feel like he's getting an authentic vibe from. An example of this would be Lil Peep, Mac Miller, both artists that he has said felt like they were expressing emotions in a way that was a little paper thin, or just he wasn't really buying it. And those are both artists who are no longer alive today. So in both cases, Fantano kind of had to circle back to those things and say, okay, maybe it was a little harsh to cheapen the emotions that went into these albums. So I do think he misses some of the emotional context behind these albums, which is natural. I think we all probably do that, but also as a music reviewer, I can see how that comes back to bite him sometimes. Other than that, I think that it kind of gets tied in with this general critique of Anthony Fantano of like, he's a misogynist, he's a racist. If he reviews a rap album badly, he's racist. If he says something bad about Fiona Apple, he's misogynist. I think people just kind of take these things and run with it. Some of it I think is a little bit of a misunderstanding of what Anthony Fantano does, but there's also this aspect of stan culture, right? Where as a stan, your goal almost on an interpersonal level, on a parasocial level, is to defend this person that you're a fan of. So they don't just take this as an album that was written about the struggle that Halsey was going through. Rather, they view her struggles in life as the priority, and defending her as a person, defending her trials and tribulations as a human being, as well as the narratives that go into having a career as a music artist, is more imperative for a lot of these people online than actually engaging with the music or understanding that Anthony Fantano's job is to be a critic, and him being honest about his feelings, not worrying too much about what the artist might feel about what he has to say, actually makes him better at his job. So when it comes to the stan stuff, that's the main thing that I want to get into, is that while I think Anthony Fantano is perfectly valid to criticize, I don't think he's perfect. I don't even necessarily like all of his takes or watch him all the time. But I do think that in general, he has a pretty solid personal ethic. He's a pretty left-leaning dude. He's pretty consistent in advocating for like general left-wing social takes, you know, pro-Palestine. He's anti-misogyny. He's anti-racist, all of that. Whether or not he upholds that to a standard that you think is acceptable is different from the fact that he seems to clearly be a person who values those things. And I think a problem that is emerging in our culture is that people who care more about that stuff are actually bigger targets for bad faith attacks and just these general pile-ons that happen online than people who don't care at all. If you don't care at all, if you're offending people, if you say things that are misogynist or racist or whatever, then you can actually just build an audience and kind of be more unstoppable than somebody who genuinely makes an effort to not be racist and then maybe makes some mistakes or has mistakes in their past that get pulled up. And because of that, those people get dogpiled, those people get demoralized, and it actually makes it harder for us to uplift figures who do have a general decent ethic. So I'll get into all that more in a second, as well as like what some of the allegations against Anthony Fantano are. I've covered some of it on this podcast before. I think it's mostly a nothing burger. People have differing views about this guy. I think he's mostly unobjectionable, honestly. Here is the next part of this video where he does an interesting move by essentially pulling up something that Halsey has in her past that is controversial, and is trying to use this as an example of how this sort of thing can be done in bad faith, but also it's sort of a tit for tat thing that he's doing here. So here's that.
The allegation that I said the album had main character syndrome because Halsey was sick or decided to sing about being sick is bullshit and stupid. So then why is it people have been running with that exact narrative for 2 whole years? Maybe because it's easier to characterize a review as evil and having nothing to do with the quality of the art at all than it is to come to grips with your favorite dropping an album that maybe you don't really listen to that much. Could it be my dislike of this album has nothing to do with the pain that inspired it and just that I think the music stinks? Could it be that making art about important topics doesn't make it important art, thank you St. Vincent? Could it be that positive reviews aren't de facto feminism, just like negative reviews aren't de facto misogyny? And look, it's still fine to disagree or even have comments or disagreements on how the review was written. formulated. I know the review is not perfect. No review is. There's actually a whole range of criticisms you could make of this review that are valid and I'm more or less fine with, because they don't involve making me public enemy number one. And okay, Halsey doesn't like being criticized that much. Who does? No big deal. What concerns me more though, and what Halsey to my knowledge has not really explained, is does she still kiss her fans? Or let me put it this way, does Halsey still kiss any of her fans on the mouth without verifying their age? Or even without explicit consent? When did Halsey stop kissing fans? I know Halsey used to do this because fans wanted help to come out and because fans wanted her to be their first kiss. Does anyone have any info about why this stopped? She has multiple autoimmune diseases, so with her compromised immune system, it's a bad idea. She apparently will often do it anyway if you ask her because she doesn't want to let people down. Okay, you know what? These posts were 7 years ago. Maybe this is just fandom rumors of stuff that used to go on at meet and greets or behind the scenes or something. Surely there's no photos of this. Oh my god, there's actually photos of this. There's actually so many photos of this. Way too many photos of this. Why are there so many pictures? There's a whole account dedicated to this. What's crazy is that a lot of this, as I looked into it further, isn't even super obscure information, because I guess the BTS army was blowing Halsey up for this stuff around 2019, 2020, with tweets like this getting covered in Paper Magazine.
I keep promising underage fans that I'm gonna make out with them. I am so going to jail.
But you know what? Maybe like all the kisses were consensual or something. Can we at least have that as a saving grace? I just made out with Halsey. Well, I was taking a video because Halsey was literally holding my hand, then she randomly kissed me. Sorry you're jealous. Okay, so I guess Halsey randomly kissed this person at a show, just randomly, probably a peck on the cheek or something, nothing big. Oh, wow. That's a whole lot to be doing for a random kiss with a total stranger. Now, I could take everything I just showed you here, make the worst possible assessment of Halsey and her behavior over it, post it straight to social media, but I'm not going to do that. Not only because, one, I don't believe Halsey is actually like a danger to society or her fans, but also, as far as I can tell, as weird as all of this is and as strange as it feels for it to be, as unexplained as it is, Halsey seems to have ceased this behavior. Still, the point of this video isn't to go at her or tear her down, but rather dispel bad faith smears about me and my content, because it doesn't take a great mind to act this way. These Twitter stans are not the brightest crayons in the box, because if you're online making hating critics a moral act and doing these calls for accountability while turning a blind eye to this,
takes my face like this, kisses me, unkisses me, and then leaves. And I'm sitting there just like, what?
You are no one's moral superior.
All right, so as he
I'm
says,
sorry.
I don't think the point of what he's doing here is to say, you know, cancel Halsey, she's done, blah, blah, blah. Again, a lot of the people in her audience already knew about this. I think more so what he's trying to do, this is sort of a neutralization type of thing. He's trying to say that, you know, Halsey and her fan base are not above criticism and are not sort of on the moral high ground. And he's trying to make it so that there can be some kind of like mutual disarming here, and that some of the drama can stop. That's why I think I don't really get the timing of this, because it had already kind of blown over. And so I think it's probably a little naive to think that this isn't just going to stir the drama up again, to think that this is going to be received really by anybody who's in these like psychotic stan fan bases, and that they're going to change their mind. Maybe a couple here and there, but really what they're going to do is just take little clips from this video, take them out of context, and just run with it as they've already done. It'll probably just start another whirlwind of bullshit. And I think the calculation Anthony Fantano is making here is either there will be a mutual disarming and things will stay quiet, or if it gets whipped up again, there at least is some shit that can be thrown from the other side. So it's not just people piling on Anthony Fantano's racist. And the main thing that people keep passing around, which leads to my most important point here, is there's this video clip, this compilation of Anthony Fantano saying the N-word or a bunch of slurs or whatever. Mostly it's kind of like other stuff. It's pretty obscure. I watched this video a little while ago. It's not as damning as people make it out to be, but mostly what he's doing is like reading off comments from here or there. In some cases, you could say maybe he's fostering kind of a toxic community where they're throwing some of that stuff around. But all in all, this is from some years ago when there was still sort of a thread of people who felt that like if you're quoting a slur, it's different than just saying it yourself. And I think culturally we've kind of moved on from that perspective, because if you take a clip of someone quoting a slur versus saying it in their own prose, it doesn't exactly look all that different. And this is a case of that. And so while I think it's valid to criticize him for this or that, or even to say, you know, as a white guy, you might have the right politics now, but clearly this history shows that there's like a negative tendency there, I think all that's fine. But I think, though, that my concern, this video, this compilation, was put together by somebody in the community of DJ Academics, who is an actual Trump supporter, who has beef with Anthony Fantano because Anthony Fantano supports Kendrick Lamar and DJ Academic supports Drake. As stupid as that is the reality. And because they got into it over that and we're going kind of tit for tat over that, somebody in his community put together this compilation to try to make Anthony Fantano look bad. I guess my concern, though, is that if the goal is to get Anthony Fantano out of here, right? The person who's going to step in and fill that space is not going to be better. It's not going to be somebody who upholds a better personal moral ethic than Anthony Fantano. That's why I think it's like pretty ill-advised to go after him and demonize him as like the worst of the worst, because there aren't that many guys who can fill that space who are going to do a better job than he does. I think that space would get taken up by somebody like DJ Academics. And the reason is because people like that are willing to step on people's toes. They're willing to say things that are offensive. They're willing to defend themselves and to fire off at people who come after them. And because of that, they take up more space and are less vulnerable to these type of takedowns. And so I think a problem that a lot of people who earnestly got a little frustrated with what is called wokeness, right? Online discourse surrounding social progressivism or whatever it might be. Normal people who found themselves disillusioned by that. I think the reason is because there is this kind of sense of like, who is controlling this narrative? If it's just a bunch of people who are throwing shit wherever they can and seeing who it sticks to, and the kind of standard changes every day, then you're asking people to keep up with an impossible ideal that nobody even really has a good grip on. And then when you ask questions about it, people are like, oh, it's not that hard to be like a halfway decent person. It's not that hard to just like apologize. But Anthony Fantano did apologize for this video when it originally came out. He has issued statements throughout his career saying, hey, you know, there's things I've said in my past or ways that I approached content in the past that I wouldn't do today. But of course, that standard doesn't apply there because of some other reason. And my point is that if we're going to survive this era where you have real racists, real fucking Donald Trumps, sexual assaulters, rapists that are in power, and way, way, way less vulnerable to this type of attack. Those people operate with impunity because they've decided they don't care. And that's a problem that we have to deal with, because if we keep tearing apart our own people because they're more vulnerable to being harshly criticized for internalized racism or unconscious bias, etc., people who are actually empathetic to those arguments are the ones who get it the hardest, it seems. And so those people are being marginalized. Meanwhile, the right-wingers are gaining power, gaining cultural sway. And so a lot of these stands they don't really think about it like that. I don't think these are people that are politically engaged at all. And in order for the narrative to be taken away from people like that so that their attacks can go back to feeling petty and worthless, is to have a more actually democratic and organized approach to what we consider this cultural standard to be. And I think that answer is something like DSA, an actual organization that is connected to real politics. And the difference there is that if you're somebody who supports real concrete politics and is participating in an organizing body that works towards that end, and that is the sort of cultural structure that in a sense dictates what we view as woke or what we view as like the ideal standard, that's going to be a lot closer to something that's politically productive than just going based off of vibes. I'm coming more and more to the view that if someone supports good politics and is putting themselves towards that as an end, then we should in general support that person, because that makes our movement stronger. And if we focus some of these conversation about who is right to uphold and who is wrong to uphold and who doesn't meet the standard, that should happen more internally, I think, within these governing bodies, because then even if somebody isn't of moral standard enough to be like at the top of the movement, they can still exist within the movement that they want to be a part of and they want to help with, rather than it being this constant in-group when there is actually no group. So people are just being alienated, demoralized, attacked for no reason. And for a lot of people, I think that pushes them to the right. So I don't think that's the case with Anthony Fantano. He's been pretty consistent, having a left-wing ethic for a long time. If he was just going to pivot and become a Trump supporter over something like this, I think he would have done it years ago. As far as whether this thing is going to work when it comes to Halsey, probably not. It's probably ill-advised. We'll see if he ended up just making this worse for himself. But at the same time, he has pretty successfully hit back against these type of attacks in the past. And I encourage anybody who hates Anthony Fantano or is sick of him to just get over it and move on. The people that you don't like don't go away, even if you attack them in bad faith. And a lot of times it kind of just makes everything more toxic. So if he's not the worst person in the world, you're probably better off focusing your vitriol on the many options that we have of people who are.
I'm in the pocket, and they know they can't slow it, can't stop shit. How the game so cold, so toxic. Can't drop cause they're in somebody's pocket. For me that's not it.